Well, hello class. This is our mini lesson on Unit 5.3 and 5.4. Decided to go ahead and combine these two since it's all talking about the Industrial Revolution, how it begins and spreads. So anyway, just to kind of lay the groundwork here for a second. Let me get to my computer. Hope y'all are doing well. Let's get this going, and here we go. So, the Industrial Revolution. The Columbian Exchange, which we spent a lot of time talking about. The growth of maritime trading empires, increased agricultural productivity, and individual accumulation of capital. All of those things combined lead to the Industrial Revolution. So here, before we had industry, before we had factories, people lived in rural areas. They grew most of their food. They made their own clothes. Sounds a lot like being in quarantine, doesn't it? Yes. Cottage industries. They were made to compete with Indian cotton, so that's cheaper. Merchants gave their raw cotton to women who spun it at home. Women had independence in this way. They also had a lot of low pay, and production is slow. Now here is the problem. This is now post-Enlightenment stuff, meaning that the demand for faster production encourages a brand new way of doing things, and thus is the introduction of the factory system, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Agricultural improvements as well, which means you can now sustain a population. Medical care has been improved. All of that is going to lead to an increase in population, the need for fewer farmers, and plenty of people to work in factories. You're going to see a humongous labor force. That, all of those things, all of these ingredients combined fuels the Industrial Revolution. Now, here are some new technologies that you should probably be aware of. First of all, the spinning jenny. Now, if this were regular world history, I'd probably make you memorize who these folks are, but I think to give you some context, it's good to go ahead and talk about the inventors as well as their inventions. The spinning jenny was James Hargreaves, which is pictured right here, where a weaver can spin more than one thread at a time. Not sure why it's called the Jenny. I'm thinking maybe he had a girlfriend or a wife named Jenny. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. The water frame, people actually realize that water power is really efficient. And Richard Arkwright invented that, a water-powered spinning wheel, which means production is even greater. And the water frame really killed the cottage industry. It doomed it. It was too big to have in houses, and Richard Arkwright, he's now known as the father of the factory, which you can see pictured here. Eli Whitney, I know you learned all about him in 8th grade, the inventor of the cotton gin. That's not really, now that's important, but really it was interchangeable parts that to me is his biggest contribution in history, because if a part broke, it can easily be replaced. A division of labor, there are bosses and there are not bosses. Not everyone has to be skilled in a factory. Specialization of labor. Instead of us making one, it's like this. If the class had to make a car, and that was our job, we had to make a car, we probably couldn't do it. But if everybody had a specialized job, somebody does steering wheels, somebody does windows, somebody does mirrors, and you do that all day long, that's your only job, that specialization of labor. Convert that into the assembly line, which we give Henry Ford credit for, which is a moving line made for quick production of a good in a factory. Folks, we have ourselves a modern economy at that time. So that's pretty cool. Again, feel free to stop the video if you need to. Great Britain is called the workshop of the world because that's where the Industrial Revolution starts. The reason why is because it was located near waterways, a lot of rivers, easy transportation. It's got a lot of natural resources, the main one being coal. It's got access to resources in the colonies, timber for ships, capital, and money. They did have the world's strongest navy. We've talked about that before. The government could not take private property in Great Britain, which encourages people to make businesses. And there was an increased population in the urban areas. Previously, the poor had lived in the commons. They were closed by the Enclosure Act and moved to cities to find jobs. Manchester and Liverpool, even today, are your predominant industrial centers in Great Britain at that time. And then we see the spread of industrialization occurring. And what I mean by that is France, Germany, the US, Russia, and Japan. And I'm not going to go through all this. You can stop the video whenever you feel like you need to. But in France, we see that industrialization was a lot slower in the 1800s. Remember, the French do everything much slower. The French Revolution did play a part in that. They have a much smaller population. Germany also very slow because it was not unified until 1871, which I mentioned in the previous video. The United States, we had the biggest workforce in the world, and we also had a large immigrant workforce. Not to mention we had farmers that were moving back as well. Russia has state-sponsored industrialization, and remember, they're still trying to get away from the relics of feudalism at that time. And then Japan, notice they have what's called defensive modernization. I think that's an interesting way to put it, defensive modernization. So they're using that to build up their military and their economy to protect themselves. So, meanwhile, as the rest of the world is industrializing, the position of the Middle East and Asia on the global market declines. So if you really want to look at what is it that kind of kills, what's the source of all this European exceptionalism that we see, it's because of industrialization. This is a complete paradigm shift. And as you can see right here, shipbuilding in Asia and Southeast Asia, well, that's going to be colonized by Great Britain, and shipbuilding had been very prominent in the region, and so the industry is going to suffer. The British Navy is going to take control of that, which ends Indian shipbuilding. You're going to see ironworks in India, which is going to take a huge hit because, once again, Britain now controls them. They control the British East India Company. High taxes made it difficult for Indians to mine and work metals, which results in mines being closed. And you see Britain has to pass some laws here to kind of put an end to that. And then textile production, which is dominated by British factories, they still need cotton, and they get it from India and also, Egypt as well. So European textiles were so cheap, nobody's buying them from India anymore because it's mass produced and it's much, much cheaper. I mean, what would you buy a T-shirt for $1, which you can get in Britain at that time, or would you order it from India, which probably cost you more like $10 or $15? Now, I'm using today's monetary language. But anyway, that's kind of what that is like. So, our next video, once we get to that, is technology in the industrial age. So, hopefully you'll stay tuned for that in the next coming days. We'll look at some technological things. This is probably one of my favorite things to talk about in world history. So, I'll hope you all join me next time.